You're listening to the Black Eagles podcast with Sinan Schwarting and Kaan Bayazit.
Ahmet Dursun Sergen aldı. Sergen Bülent yan yana. Sergen Bülent. Sergen. Orada Tümer var. Tümer'e doğru aksiyon kaybetti. Tümer topu aldı. Sergen aldı. Gol! Gol! Sergen attı. Sergen attı. Şampiyonluk geldi. Sergen attı. Şampiyonluk geldi.
İbrahim'in pası. Roma. Şimdi Ahmet. İkinci gole gidiyor Beşiktaş. Ahmet. Ve
Welcome back, everybody. Episode 59 of Beşiktaş International's The Black Eagles podcast. I am your host, Sinan Schwarting, live from New York City. And I'm only here briefly. Today we've got another special, this time short, and I promise, short episode featuring a guest. Again, Kaan is our interviewer today. And he's interviewing Alex Kirkland. Alex Kirkland is a broadcast journalist and football commentator for Real Madrid TV. So he's an expert on all things Real Madrid and obviously a native English speaker. And Kaan has gotten him to come on and talk all about Guti in his work with Real Madrid as a coach. Specifically, obviously, we all know he was a great success as a player. So he's come on to say a little bit about what Guti could show us as a coach going forward should we decide to pick him up as our next coach. Now, this is, of course, relevant right now as news filters in of Mircea Lucescu's firing from the Turkish national team. This is confirmed, and it is widely speculated, and almost, I'd say 95% in the bag, that Şenol Güneş will be next in line. He will be the coach for the Turkish national side. Now, the speculation is that he might sort of have that dual role of national team coach and, finish out his contract with Beşiktaş, meaning till the end of this season. Even still, this is a relevant conversation because then we're still going to be back where we would be right now, looking for a coach. But there are lots of other rumors. There are rumors, of course, that Guti would be next in line, which is why he was brought in. This was fueled furthermore by the quitting of İlhan Mansız last week when he stepped down. Many people thought maybe that was a sign that Guti had been selected as the heir to Şenol Güneş. There have been quite a few rumors about Tamer Tuna coming in. I mean, a number of rumors, but we won't get too much into that this episode. I'll wait till Kaan is here and we can kind of go into detail on all of those rumors. But what we will do is go really deep into detail on what kind of a coach Guti could be for Beşiktaş, should he get the role. So without further ado, I present to you Kaan Bayazit, live from Belgium, interviewing Alex Kirkland. I'm assuming live from Madrid, Spain, via Skype. Thank you to Kaan for getting him. Thank you, Alex, for coming in. And Black Eagles podcast followers, listeners, we present to you this interview.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Black Eagles podcast. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about Guti, given the fact that Şenol Güneş might be on his way out with Mircea Lucescu being sacked as Turkish national team coach on Monday. And here to talk to me about Guti's coaching capabilities is Alex Kirkland, a Spanish football expert and also commentator for Real Madrid TV. He's watched a lot of Real Madrid's youth games, and Guti was, of course, coach of Real Madrid's youth teams from 2013 to 2018, so he'll be able to give us some keen insights on Guti as a coach. Alex, thank you very much and welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
And thank you for coming on. So, Alex, first and foremost, what type of a coach would you describe Guti as?
It's an interesting one. I think the first thing to say is that to a lot of people here in Madrid, it was maybe a surprise that he became a coach at all. Because if you think back to the kind of player that he was, I mean, you guys will know he was hugely talented. He was kind of a flair player. The criticism that he got sometimes, certainly here in Spain, was that he wasn't always consistent, that he didn't always make the most of that talent. He was quite a big character off the pitch as well. He was a big fan of the Madrid nightlife. And so he wasn't necessarily one of those players. You know, there are some players who you just know that they're going to become a coach after they finish playing. You can see that they've got that there. You know, someone like Pep Guardiola, you could tell when he was a player, he was the kind of player that you thought this guy could make a good coach. Guti wasn't necessarily that kind of guy. And when he finished playing, he went into the media here. He was on the radio. He was on the TV. And there wasn't necessarily a sign that he was going to become a coach. So first of all, that came as something of a surprise. It is a fairly common route that Real Madrid like to get former players involved as coaches in the youth system. You've seen it before Guti. You've seen it since. For example, at the moment, you've got people like Xabi Alonso and Raul, who are coaches of Real Madrid youth teams as well. So that's a fairly common thing. But when Guti started coaching, there was some question marks, or just a bit of mystery, I suppose, about would he be a good coach and what kind of coach would he be? And you have to say, in the time that he was a Real Madrid youth coach, he impressed everybody, and he kind of answered that question, that he had the ability to be a really good coach. His teams always performed. They did really well. Now, of course, the caveat there is that Real Madrid's youth teams almost always do well by their very nature, because youth football here in Spain is regionalised. So most of Real Madrid youth teams' games are against other teams from the Madrid region. So you've got games, of course, against Atletico. You'll play against, I don't know, Getafe or Leganés or Rayo. But then the other games are against much smaller clubs from the Madrid region as well. And so Real Madrid's youth teams are expected to win every game. I mean, even more so than the first team are expected to win every game. So any Real Madrid youth coach, you have to take that into account, that a lot of the games aren't necessarily the opposition aren't necessarily of the highest standards. However, even by those standards, Guti excelled, and in fact, he broke records. He did things as a coach that no Real Madrid youth coach had ever done before. For example, when he was in charge of the under-19s, which is called Juvenil A here in Spain, which is the most kind of senior of the youth teams before you get to the B team, to Real Madrid Castilla. He broke records with them. He did the treble with them, which no coach had ever won before. That treble basically was winning the league, winning the group that his Juvenil A were in, and then going on to win the Copa de Campeones and the Copa del Rey, the Champions Cup and the King's Cup. And no youth coach had ever done that before. So that was when people started taking notice and thinking, wow, Guti might have something special. The one thing he didn't manage to do, the one thing that was kind of outstanding on his to-do list as a Real Madrid youth coach, was success in Europe. Of course, you've got the UEFA Youth League now, which is a huge success, the youth version of the Champions League. And they didn't manage to win that. So that was the one frustration. But otherwise, he was hugely successful. He then, after that treble-winning season, had another year, 2017, 2018. And it was then that he decided to leave. There had been lots of speculation. You know, was he ready to step up and take charge of the B team, take charge of Castilla? That couldn't happen because at that time, Santi Solari was still in the job. Now, of course, ironically, as it turned out, Guti left. And then Santi Solari ended up taking over the first team. And there would have been a spot there for Guti with Castilla, but understandably he felt like for his progression he had to maybe leave the club and go elsewhere, and that's exactly what he did.
And before in the summer when Lopetegui took over at Real Madrid, there was also mention of Guti even being named, speculation of him taking over the first team, and then again when Lopetegui got sacked a couple of months ago. But Solari, of course, ended up taking over, as you already alluded to. How serious do you think he was considered for that job if Solari was kind of ahead of him in the pecking order? Do you think he ever really was seriously considered?
I mean, there was certainly a lot of speculation about it in the media. They were talking about it a lot here, and they were talking about it as a serious possibility. Yes, the issue would have been, as you rightly say, Solari was kind of next in the pecking order, because generally the idea is that Real Madrid are a club that like to promote from within. We've seen that a lot with coaches moving from the B team to the first team. It's happened now with Solari. It happened before with Zidane. It's happened in the past as well. But the pecking order is very much that. You know, you tend to go from Castilla, the B team, to the first team. And so if Guti had been appointed kind of leapfrogging Santi Solari, that would have been maybe interpreted certainly as a snub to Solari, because the idea would be that he was sort of the man in waiting. Nonetheless, there was a lot of discussion about it, and certainly the media here were taking it seriously that Guti could take over. Not least because, look, Guti is a hero among Real Madrid fans. Real Madrid fans still sing Guti's name at the Bernabeu all these years later after he's finished playing. So he would have been a popular choice in that sense. But I think maybe being realistic, it would have been a step too soon and a huge step up. You have seen, like I say, coaches like Zidane and Solari going from Castilla, the B team, to the first team. But that's a different thing. At least when you're coaching the B team, that is senior football. And of course, B teams here in Spain are integrated into the professional league structure. So Real Madrid's B team, Castilla, they play in the third tier of Spanish football. So it's senior football. It's not youth football. And so the jump, it's still a big jump, but it's less of a big jump. So I think the feeling is it would have been too much of a jump to go straight from youth football straight to the Real Madrid first team. And so I think it was understood that, no, Guti probably needed at least another interim step before making that leap. And so it was understood that he might want to go on and become an assistant coach elsewhere, which, as you say, is exactly what happened.
Yeah, and it made sense for him to go and be an assistant coach at the only other club he ever played for as a player. And it was kind of received here in Turkey. Here I live in Belgium, so over in Turkey, it was kind of received as he's the next in line. Probably he's being brought in for Şenol Güneş, who has already been being linked with the Turkish national team for quite a while, more than a year at least. Before Lucescu even took the job, Şenol Güneş was heavily rumored, and back then Beşiktaş kind of said no. But it was clear that Şenol Güneş's future would lay with the Turkish national team. And I think that Guti, and many people think this, that he was brought in to first work as an understudy under Güneş, get reacquainted with the league, with the mentality, all that kind of stuff, get to know the types of football that the opposition in the league plays, so that he's ready once he takes over. That's kind of what I'm still thinking is going to happen. There's lots of rumors of other people being linked with the job, but for me it makes perfect sense for Guti to take that job. And here we've heard that Guti did a good job at Real Madrid for their youth teams, but we don't really know anything more than that. We don't know what's his coaching style like, what kind of philosophy, what type of lineup does he prefer? Does he prefer a pressing type of football? What type? Is he a very modern coach? Is he more old school? Can you tell us a little bit more about his tactical ability?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is in terms of his mentality. I mean, he is a winner and he is hugely demanding, and you could see that from he's that kind of coach on the touchline. Very active, spends a lot of time on his feet, very, very hands-on. Like I say, he has that winning mentality, and he wants to see that in his players as well. Certainly with the young players, you see this a lot. Of course you do, because it's that crucial stage of a young player's development. But you did see him being really hands-on and talking them through games and giving them quite what looked like detailed kind of one-to-one instructions at times, and they did seem to really take it on. In terms of the way that his teams played, he displayed a certain degree of flexibility as a coach in terms of system and in terms of style, I think. Now, of course, all Real Madrid youth teams, there are certain kind of unifying principles that you're expected to adhere to. You couldn't be a Real Madrid youth coach and, I don't know, start playing long ball football and just kind of punting the ball up to the centre forward. I don't think you'd last very long. You're expected to play kind of passing football. You're expected to keep the ball on the deck. So, of course, his teams did that. He tended to play with a back four rather than a back three. He would switch it around on occasion. I did see his teams play with a back three once or twice maybe, but it was the exception rather than the rule. It tended to be a 4-3-3, playing with two wingers and a centre forward. It's not very common these days that you'll see any teams playing with two centre forwards, is it? But you certainly don't in the Real Madrid youth system. It's almost always one central player and then two wide players and then a midfield three. And the configuration of the midfield three would switch around, but sometimes it would just be the one holding player and sometimes it would be two. With Guti's teams, it tended to be a 4-3-3 with one holding midfielder. So a fairly conventional 4-3-3 and then two more kind of freer, more offensive-minded midfielders, and then a front three, as I say. But yeah, there was also a certain degree of flexibility there. Like I say, with youth football, of course, I think as a coach, you don't necessarily get to fully express your coaching ideas because you're working with kids. You're working with young players, and I suppose that there is a limit in terms of kind of tactical concepts and how much you want them to take on board. You couldn't necessarily be coaching the under-17s, the under-18s, the under-19s, and try and implement a coaching style, I don't know, as radical as that of what Pep Guardiola does at Manchester City or something like that, because it might just be too much information almost for these youngsters to take on. And I'm not sure that Guti is that kind of coach anyway. Like I say, looking at him, the kind of person he is, the kind of character he is. I mean, it's not to say that he couldn't be details orientated, but I'm not sure he's necessarily that kind of thinker about football. But also, like I say, it's so early in his coaching career, and having only worked with young players, it's hard to say how many conclusions we can draw about him as a coach as a whole. Because also, like I say, the background is that he wasn't necessarily a player that we expected to go into coaching. He wasn't one of those guys when he was a player that was kind of super professional and always had his mind on the job. So in a way, everything about his coaching career so far has been something of a surprise, and there's no reason to think that he won't continue to surprise us.
Yeah, and it's something that I've heard a lot from some of our fans that worry that, look, he's a guy that could have come to training intoxicated at times. How professional is he really going to be? And honestly, I tell those people, you really can't judge a coach based on their playing career. We've seen it quite frequently. Although I do have to say that in most cases, you don't see a lot of strikers going into the coaching the coaching job and being very successful. Usually we're seeing more the more midfielders, defensive players that become the big successful coaches. But for example, in Belgium right now, I don't know if you've seen a lot of Racing Genks games this season.
I can't say I have.
Well, they have a coach called Philippe Clement, and he used to be a very quote-unquote boring player, someone who rarely ever gave interviews, and he came across as a very just a boring player. So people really didn't expect of him to play the type of football that he has his team play right now, which is absolutely phenomenal attacking football with great counter-attacking ability, kind of like Real Madrid did a couple of years ago. Just works out perfectly. Everyone seems to know their job. It's breathtaking to watch for a Belgian team, and that's something I try to tell people as well. Like, don't put too much weight into what a player was like as in his playing career, because their coaching ability could be very different. I mean, a player always plays to their strengths, but one player understands the game, and there's so many other players that you watch them on the pitch, you know that when a guy like they would have like a guy like Pep talking to them, they'd be like, when there's the team debriefing going on, there's just there's a couple of those players that just zone out.
I think there are two things that we can say, aren't there, with absolute certainty. One is that being a great player doesn't make you a great coach, because we've seen lots of examples of really great players who've been really terrible coaches, yes, and vice versa. And the other thing is that the type of player that you are as a player doesn't determine the type of coach you are or the way that your team play. Because yes, again, we've seen examples of players who are really exciting players and their teams have been kind of boring to watch, and the other way around as well. So yeah, I agree. Also, look, people grow, people develop, and people change. And the kind of guy that Guti was when he was a player, and yes, I'm sure a lot of the things that people say in Turkey about the kind of guy that he was off the pitch, they say the same things in Madrid, believe me. But yeah, people grow and people change and people mature, and I'm sure that's been his case as well. And I think you're right. We can't necessarily judge him as a coach by the kind of guy that he was, 10 or 15 years ago.
So have you ever heard of perhaps any of the youth players mention him in particular, like, he really made me better or something like that, or he taught me a lot, something like that?
I think that the main thing I would say is that you could see that they looked up to him as an idol, frankly, and they respected and borderline worshipped him. Even though, for a lot of these youngsters, because you think about the age difference, they might not remember when he was in his pomp as a player, even though we're talking about 10, 15 years ago, something like that. For a lot of these kids, because he was in charge of under 17, under 18, under 19 level, they simply wouldn't remember those days. But nonetheless, they might have seen the clips, they might have seen some stuff on YouTube, they might have seen the famous back heel assist.
Yeah, the back heel indeed.
But that might be about it. But even so, he is still a legend here in Madrid. He's a massive name here. Like I say, the Real Madrid fans still sing his name at the Bernabeu. And so the kids were aware of that, and you could definitely see that. They looked up to him, they respected him, they idolized him. When he was talking, they would listen. So that is undoubtedly true. And especially with young players, I mean, I think that's half the battle won. If you've got their attention and if you've got their respect and they are listening to you, then I think that's the most important thing. So he certainly had that with the young players. He would have that here as well. I think if he were to come back to Madrid in some sort of more senior capacity, that would also be true. And from what I know about his reputation, his fame in Turkey, I know that he was only there for a short time, but my understanding is that he was a popular figure in his time there. And I see on social media he'll still get plenty of messages from fans over there and that kind of thing. So he might well have a degree of that respect there as well. But certainly here in Madrid, he remains an absolute legend, maybe more so than people might think, maybe more so because, although he was a big player for that Real Madrid team in the 2000s, he wasn't always an automatic starter. Sometimes he was in and out of the team. But despite that, he really is a legend here.
Yeah, and he's always stayed in touch with the fans in Turkey via social media, even predating his coaching career. So I wouldn't say it's him just trying to plant those seeds to get a job there. I think he really genuinely liked the attention and appreciated the fans. Always has, I think, because even though he might have not left on the best notes in the club at the time with that board that's gone by the way. Because in Turkey it's a similar system as in Spain, where you have a socio type of system, so presidents get elected and all that kind of stuff. But he's always stayed in touch with the fans, so that's very important. That's also why I think people are very receiving of him. Now, another thing I'd like to ask you is, when you watched their games, when you watched Guti's teams play, did you see any particular emphasis on, for example, set pieces or something? Or would their main source of finding goals really be combination football? You already mentioned it a little bit earlier that was something that's something is expected of a coach at Real Madrid youth team. But what do you think? Did he put an emphasis, maybe overly so, on one aspect of the game, or did he really distribute his attention on all different aspects of the game?
I wouldn't say that set pieces stood out necessarily. I would say it's more about what you were saying there, that kind of a quick passing combination play, looking to make those quick transitions and get the ball upfield and get into the box and score that way, rather than set pieces or anything else. Naturally, the Real Madrid youth teams that he was coaching, as I say, were really, really talented, and often more talented than the teams they were playing against as well. So there wasn't necessarily a reliance or a need to kind of rely on set pieces. Most often they could kind of outplay the opposition because they were superior in terms of talent. But yeah, I would say in terms of style, it would be about that. It would be about playing a kind of quick passing football, one touch movement, the kind of football that a lot of football fans enjoy seeing. But like I say, we have to remember that you can't necessarily draw too many conclusions from his time as a Real Madrid youth coach, just because it is youth football. Like I say, quite often they are playing against inferior opposition until they get to those latter stages of the season, when they're going for the trophies that I talked about, and in Europe in the Europa Youth League as well. So it's hard to draw too many conclusions, and it's hard to say how much he was necessarily able to do exactly what he would like to do, given the fact that he was working with young players. I think the only way to really form any concrete conclusions about him as a coach is to see him in senior football. Now, whether that is in Turkey, whether that's here if he comes back to Madrid and would get a chance maybe with Castilla, because I don't think he's necessarily burnt any bridges there. I think there are possibilities to come back and coach the B team. I don't think that him leaving in search of new opportunities was seen as any kind of snub. I think, like I say, it was seen as being the next step in his development. So I do think it's only really once he's been in charge at senior level that we can really draw too many conclusions.
So let's say he's successful in Turkey if he gets the job. Would you see Real Madrid come knocking on his door in, say, 2 to 3 years if they need a new coach? Would he be a logical candidate, you think?
He would certainly be talked about. Now, how much of that would be kind of media talk and kind of the fans liking the idea of it, and how much would be from within the club, I don't know. I think it's certainly true to say that someone like Santi Solari, who's now in charge, he had been looked at, and it was known that he was someone who was close to the board and the president, and they liked him and they saw him as being one for the future for a long time. I don't know if you can necessarily say that about Guti. That's not to say there's not a good relationship there, because any of these former players that are brought into the youth system and work as coaches, like I say, that happens for a reason. It doesn't happen with every player. It happens with players that they expect big things of in terms of coaching, that they want to have around the club. The same goes right now, as I mentioned, for Xabi Alonso and Raul. Those are the two that are coaching at the moment. I think it's the under-14s and the under-15s or something like that. So they've got a little while to go. They're kind of starting off where Guti started at the start of his time at the academy. And what tends to happen is that a coach tends to progress sort of year by year. So the idea with Raul and Xabi Alonso is that they'll move up, with the under-16s, the under-17s, the under-18s, just like Guti did when he was here. So those are the two names right now that everyone's excited about here. And also because of their status and because of the kind of guys that they are, I think everyone expects someone like Xabi Alonso to be a top coach, because he worked with, if you think about the coaches that Xabi Alonso worked with as a player, he worked with everybody and all different styles, from Pep Guardiola to Rafa Benitez to Jose Mourinho. He learnt so much. And so those are names that are talked about as being, maybe not in the short term, but in the medium term, certainly potentially the future for Real Madrid. Guti may well come back into that conversation, unless there's the feeling that maybe, if it was going to happen, would it have happened in the summer? Has that chance gone? Like I said, I don't think he's burnt any bridges at all, and I certainly think he would be in the conversation. But I don't know if he would necessarily be absolutely top of the list. And like I say, if I had to mention one or two names who are kind of club legends, former players, who are going to be in the mix in the next, maybe they're not in the next year or two, but maybe a little bit further afield, maybe 3 years or something like that, you might be talking about someone like Xabi Alonso or someone like Raul.
And then to end my questioning of you, Alex, did you notice any particular weaknesses in his coaching style? For example, how come the youth league didn't end up in success? How did he perform in the games versus Barcelona, perhaps in the Copa del Rey or so? Because you did mention that the league system was regionalized, so I don't know how many games they actually ended up playing against clubs like Barcelona or Valencia. But could you mention a little bit about his coaching ability in the big games against tougher opposition, and how come their European campaigns didn't end in success?
Yeah, the UEFA Youth League has been tough, and it has kind of eluded Real Madrid in recent years. Quite often they've got through to what they call the Final Four, the semi-finals, and they haven't taken that next step. As I recall, I think they got really undone. It may be in his second season or maybe his first with the under-19s. There was a bit of a bad day at the office, some catastrophic defending, and I think they conceded a couple of early goals. Maybe they switched off a little bit. It wasn't necessarily anything you could say that was Guti's fault. It was his responsibility. It was just a bad game against a good team. In terms of playing the best teams here, of course, they do play Atletico Madrid. In their group, in their Madrid group in the league, home and away every season. And it's funny, the Atletico Madrid youth teams, they really are mirror images of the first team. They play the way that Diego Simeone's Atletico play, and that was where Guti's team would have some problems, in the same way that you might see the Real Madrid first team have some problems too. I think it was in 2016, 2017, where Guti's under-19s basically went the whole season unbeaten domestically, but they did lose to Atletico Madrid. I think it was in early 2017, and I think that was, it's a Madrid derby. It was feisty. Maybe things got a bit out of hand. I think the one thing to watch with Guti is that kind of temper of his, that he had as a player. I think he's still got that as a coach as well. And I talked about him being animated on the touchline. If it's one thing to keep an eye on with him, it's maybe letting that get away from him, And I think you don't be at all surprised to see some bust-ups on the touchline there. But with opposition coaches or with referees, he was never reluctant to make his feelings known, certainly to the referee if he wasn't happy with something. So keep an eye on that as well, because he is that kind of character. He is a slightly combustible character. And so in terms of weaknesses, it's not necessarily a coaching weakness, but it's maybe something to keep an eye on, that temper of his and how well he is able to control it.
Well, Alex, thank you very much for all your insights. I think we really learned a great deal, and I think that this will probably be something that a lot of fans will be happy to hear. I think a lot of our fans expect us to go back to a combination style football. I think we have the players now with the Shinji Kagawa, Adem Ljajic, and a lot of other talents that we do have. So because Beşiktaş have been playing a little bit over... Their play has been a little overemphasized on just getting the ball to Ricardo Quaresma on the right and then just crossing it in. And that's something that's been frustrating fans for the last 2 seasons or so, because Şenol Güneş has such an unwavering loyalty to Quaresma. And, you know, I love Quaresma, great player, but I don't think he should be the most important player at his age. And I don't think that a team should rely overly on one tactic. So hopefully Guti does take over, because from what you have told me, I think he definitely could possess the skill set to be successful, and we'd be in for some fun football. But yeah, thanks, Alex. Do you have anything you want to plug? Where can people find you on Twitter? Where can they follow you? Do you have any projects of your own that you might want to plug here?
Well, look, they can follow me on Twitter at Alex Kirkland. And yeah, I produce the Spanish Football Podcast. If any of your listeners are into La Liga and Spanish football, give us a follow on Twitter. It's at TSF_podcast. And look for the Spanish Football Podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, Acast, all the usual places that you get your podcast. I recommend checking out.
Definitely give them a sub, maybe give them an iTunes review as well, guys. And yeah, thanks again, Alex, and thank you for listening to the Black Eagles podcast, and we'll be back soon.
All right, very nice. So thank you to Alex Kirkland for coming in. Kaan, great job interviewing as always. Great job getting only the most illustrious guests for our Black Eagles podcast listeners, keeping you guys the most informed quadrant of the Beşiktaş Twitterverse. As always, thank you so much, Alex Kirkland, for coming in. And yeah, fascinating stuff. Should be interesting to see what kind of news pops up in the next few days as far as who our coach will be going forward. I think the bookies would have Şenol Güneş as favorite to finish out the year, but we shall see. And we'll talk plenty with Kaan as that becomes relevant. Yeah, that's it. I'm taking us out. It's just me. So I can't call Kaan in to do it. So yeah, everybody, listen in. Tune in to our upcoming episode. Beşiktaş will be on the road in Malatya, facing Yeni Malatyaspor. They're playing Friday, so stay tuned to that. 12:30 p.m. here in New York City, Eastern Standard Time, which I believe means it's going to be 6:30 p.m. for those of you in Istanbul, 5:30 for Kaan, maybe 5:30 and 4:30. I'm not exactly sure on that, but anyway, stay tuned to hear what we have to say post-match, as always. It's a big match for us. Yeni Malatya is still sort of scraping in there, keeping themselves relevant in the Super League. They're in 4th place now at the end of the last match day. They have 34 points, right behind us, Beşiktaş, who have 36 points. Beşiktaş is now 3 points back on Galatasaray, who have 39 points, and of course 9 points back on Başakşehir. But so yeah, if we're going to stay in this thing, we got to beat Yeni Malatyaspor on the road. So it should be exciting. I look forward to it. And yeah, I'm excited to present to you guys our post-match response to the whole thing. Beyond that, follow us on Twitter at Eagles_podcast. Follow our mothership at Beşiktaş_INT for all the latest news. Stay posted on all the coach rumors to be upcoming. I'm sure they'll be flying in fast and heavy. Follow Kaan at RAZZERIN Razarian. Follow our guest, today's special illustrious guest, Alex Kirkland at Alex Kirkland. ALEXKIRKLAND, no spaces. Follow me, your host, Sinan Schwarting, at Sir_writes_a lot. Yeah, and that's it. keep yourself healthy, keep yourself hydrated. Spring is nearly upon us, and this season is just kicking into high gear. So, we'll see you guys on the weekend. And until then, go Beşiktaş! See you guys.
Beşiktaş International hopes you enjoyed this program.